Hello, and welcome to the CivilNet podcast. I'm your host, Paul Vartan-Sokiasyan. There's a lot going on in the news right now concerning Armenia, both outside the country, internationally, and inside. So to help make sense of it, we've brought our favorite guest, Eric Hakopian, back here to make sense of all this.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here, Eric. And so we're going to cover a whole bunch of issues instead of focusing on one. Last time we did that, our viewers gave us a lot of good feedback, and so we're going to give the crowd what they want. So first up, Abu Dhabi. Prime Minister Pashinyan and President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, met there just last week, and the meeting went on for about 5 hours. Though we have almost no information as to what actually happened in there, what took so long, where is this going? So do you know anything?
Well, most likely nothing happened. Because fundamentally this peace agreement is not going to be signed. And Azerbaijan is going to constantly put different conditions, and when those conditions are met, he won't agree to them and he'll add more. So most likely what this meeting was to have a meeting to reach a consensus to have another meeting. I don't think anything substantial came out of this except the fact that another confirmation that this peace treaty is never going to be signed.
Does it really take 5 hours to decide that? Or
in the diplomatic terms, yes.
So one of the many things that we keep hearing about when it comes to preconditions is this corridor business. Mm-hmm. And maybe interestingly, it seems to be on President Trump's radar of all people. It reminds me, a couple months ago, we had talked about a moment when Trump said that there are two countries that no one's ever really heard of, or you won't even know that they're having this war, that are very close to peace now. And at the time we speculated, is that Armenia and Azerbaijan? Is it not? It could be. We had nothing to go on. Now he's actively saying this is approaching an endpoint. It's going to be resolved successfully. And we have Tom Barak, who is the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, talking about the U.S. taking over a corridor in Syunik to kind of satisfy Azerbaijan's demands. What do you make of this?
First of all, these are two completely separate things. When he's saying something has come to a completion, it does not mean it's the peace treaty, which is not going to happen. It's very, very highly unlikely for it to happen. This has to do with what's, for a better phrase, the Witkoff proposal. The Witkoff proposal, from what we understand, and no one knows the details, from what we understand, from what's been leaked here or there, is the United States leasing and running the road through Syunik, which will be in sovereign control of the Armenian state, but will be run by an American company. Now, what is the attractiveness of this from the Armenian point of view is simply actually only one, and that is U.S. presence means essentially a sort of a U.S. security guarantee, because a place where the United States has its footprint is not going to be attacked. So it essentially takes, in the short term, aggression off the table. That's the only attractive thing about it for the Armenian side. For the other side, and the other sides being mostly Russia and Azerbaijan, the road was never really about the road, because this road, all these myths about this ties Turkey to Central Asia. There's plenty of other ties with Turkey to Central Asia, and these are all, most of what you have in that region is irrelevant economies. The trade that Turkey does with Europe and the Middle East is far, far more relevant than anything that could possibly come through. You go through Azerbaijan, the Caspian, there's so many obstacles to that, to a bunch of irrelevant economies. What this was about, this road, and this comes out of the Article 9 of the infamous November 9th agreement, it was an excuse for Azeri aggression against Armenia, and is also an excuse for the Russians to be able to stay in Armenia, because that road was supposed to be controlled by the FSB. So what you have here is this issue being taken off the table by the Americans saying that we're going to run it. Now, whether you're for it or you're not, you need to know the details. If this is our Armenian sovereign road run by an American company, that's not problematic. If it's Armenia doesn't have sovereignty over that road, then that is problematic. From what I understand, Armenia will have sovereignty over that road, except the road will be run by an American company. But the attractiveness is the American presence pretty much ends the threat of aggression over the short term, which is exactly what we need, because over the next couple of years, you're going to cut the capacity, our capacities will increase to a point where an attack on Armenia really wouldn't even be on the table for the other side. So this is what this road is about from what we know now. There's a lot of speculation, and frankly, this is the fault of this government because they haven't explained what this is in detail. So if you don't explain something in detail and you give it bits, it's very easy for people to misunderstand what it is. But the attractiveness of it is very clear from this side. It is essentially U.S. involvement, U.S. security guarantees because of U.S. presence. I suspect this is not something that Baku wants because they feel that they're cornered. Because on the one hand, he is afraid, this being Ilham Aliyev, he's afraid of Donald Trump because for obvious reasons. But at the same time, most likely what happened in September 23 in the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, there was some kind of an understanding with the Russians in which, yes, the Russians will leave Artsakh and let it be ethnically cleansed, but the Russians will get the road. And the Russians will keep a presence, and Azerbaijan is willing to be an instrument of aggression against Armenia. And this essentially takes that off the table. So this is essentially pushing Aliyev to a corner to choose between someone he fears in Donald Trump and someone he also likely fears, which is Vladimir Putin, that he's made a deal with. So what I'm guessing will happen here is that it's a good chance he will say yes to the road because he's afraid of Trump, but then that almost guarantees that he will not sign the peace treaty, and that's what he will go to Putin with, saying, you know what, I didn't sign this. So he can continue the internal, all the rhetoric will not change. Western Azerbaijan, they'll keep talking about all of these things. They'll keep up this Armenian enemy image because his regime cannot continue without an external enemy, a credible external enemy, and an Armenian one is the most credible one for countless historical reasons. So most likely he will split the difference, say yes to the road, but this pretty much, if this road agreement happens, it pretty much closes the door on a peace agreement, which is the absolute dichotomy here.
Well, that makes me think. I mean, so would he allow the road to operate? I guess that would be him. I mean, that's to his benefit to be crossing over Syunik to Nakhichevan. But if there's no peace deal, does that mean there are no other road openings? The border remains closed. Armenia, is stuck?
I suspect so. From what we know, this road opening is about this. It is not about opening all other transportation networks. The idea is that this will lead to peace. I don't think it will lead to peace. What this probably leads to is freezing the current no war, no peace condition into something more permanent, in the sense that a U.S. presence means there'll be no war. But that does not mean there'll be a peace agreement. And given the fact that Azerbaijan holds a veto over the Turkish border, it means the border won't open. We essentially have what we have now, with a far less likelihood of a war. That's the most likely scenario.
Wow, so it sounds like a dead end in many respects. And you mentioned Azerbaijan and Putin. So another thing that we've been seeing in the background for the past few weeks has been this idea of worsening relations. I mean, it's happened multiple times. This is not the first time that they've talked about a complete fallout in Azerbaijan-Russian relations. But this time, maybe again, they're saying, no, this time it's for real. So what do you think is going on there?
Most likely, not that this thing has actually gone on for about 10 days. Most likely nothing. Most likely it's completely exaggerated and doesn't have much to do with anything. Now, this does not mean that there are no underlying issues. This does not mean, for example, that the Russian intelligence services didn't come down on Azeri criminal networks that are very much closely tied to the state, which probably led to the murder of those two people that are likely criminals. That it's not like the dispute isn't there, because sort of you have two criminalized mafia states where the line between business law and intelligence is actually very thin. So if they could have their own disputes that are real, but if you look at it, they have not touched the most fundamental parts of the relationship. And the most fundamental part of the relationship are the fundamental economic parts. Azerbaijan still continues to launder Russian gas and oil, which is what the Russians care about, and they haven't cut that off at all. And if the Russians want to hurt Azerbaijan, they can simply put 100,000 street vendors and fruit vendors and send them back to Azerbaijan. You can greatly damage their economy. So this is a whole bunch about nothing. It's laughable to think that a criminalized Azeri state cares if that two mafiosos get killed in a small town in Russia, or the Russian state cares if a bunch of draft dodgers get beat up in Baku. in phony, arrests and trials.
Yeah, for the viewers who might not know, there was a crackdown in Azerbaijan. People got killed by the name of Safarov, which is a familiar name. I don't know.
He got killed in Russia.
Yeah, in Russia. I don't know, familiar name or not. And then Azerbaijan kind of took revenge by beating up these draft dodgers, and it truly, I mean, they looked bad.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's been a very ugly and maybe the most physical manifestation. But this is, again, the little people don't matter to people like Aliyev and Putin. So they're just caught in the middle.
It is. This is. If you look at it, given the fact that the fundamental relationship points haven't been touched, it's probably nothing now. Well, what you do see is there was an intense media campaign by all the pro-Azeri media, whether it's BBC, Al Jazeera, to blow this up as some kind of a great break, that that Azerbaijan is some great Western force taking on Russia and it's moving away from Russia. That's all complete nonsense, but it was obviously a very well done PR campaign, because everyone from YouTube influencers to analysts to every primary newspaper is writing about this as, it's this great break between two dictators.
Yep, YouTube videos, they lost another, well, Russia lost another,
yes. But most likely, when we look at it in hindsight of 10 days, given the fact that the fundamental important parts haven't been touched, this is likely a whole lot to do with nothing.
Well, now speaking of crackdowns, we have one of our own here at home. This is involving a billionaire, Samvel Karapetyan, who happens to own the electric networks of Armenia. And many people have said this looks undemocratic, especially for a administration that's kind of made its whole pitch to the world as we are a democracy. But then they will say, well, this is Russia trying to get involved, and they're Russian agents, and we're to defend democracy, we need to shut these people down. So what do you make of what's going on?
It's very troubling. We all know that there was going to be Russian interference of one kind or another. In fact, that Russian interference has never stopped, elections or not. All these influencers, media outlets that push an anti-Western, anti-government, pro-Russian line. Okay, that's a given. But that, in and of itself, is not an excuse to resort to what are borderline undemocratic or anti-democratic methods. For example, let's leave Mr. Karapetyan aside. They're lifting immunity over a few opposition MPs. This is exactly what goes on in Turkey. Now, is it possible that these people were involved in corruption before? Quite likely, but that's also irrelevant at this point. Some of these people have been in office for 4 years, and now you get around to doing this a year before the election. So what you have is this does not look good, and the fact that the state is willing, this government is willing to criminalize the opposition, using the reality of the Russian interference, which is real. You have to be very careful here, because first of all, people talk about the Western. What is the West going to say? The West is going to do nothing, because the West doesn't care if Armenia is a democracy or not, no matter what they say.
They're still making a lot of lip service to Armenian democracy. We heard a few days ago at an event. And
what they care about is for Armenia to be pro-Western. They don't care. I mean, what's the difference between Belarus and Azerbaijan? Lukashenko is in many ways far better than Ilham Aliyev. But he's under sanction. Aliyev is not. One, because Aliyev is not openly anti-Western, or is actually placed to be pro-Western. So the West didn't bring us democracy, and the West isn't going to preserve democracy. What we have to be careful with here is, no matter what other countries are doing, not to allow an erosion of democratic principles and taking away immunity. That's a quick road to hell. And what we could have is that this supposed coup attempt, there's probably something to it if you look at all the evidence, might become the Gulen case of Armenia, in which it's used for years to go after and prosecute people that this government doesn't like. So this is something that internally we need to resist, that this is not acceptable, that these kinds of things, yes, if you need to stand up to Russian interference, you should, but that does not give you a carte blanche to criminalize the opposition.
The question is, how does one stand up to it? Because we have now less than a year out into elections, and that magical third force that we always pray for to show up, the rational, Western-minded, but still like very good guys. I don't see him here yet. We've got Pashinyan on one side, and then we've got the same old who look like they're ready to go against him. And I mean, I don't see how they're going to win, despite no matter how things go. But, you know, so is Pashinyan getting too much power and to a point where he can't be stopped?
Well, we'll see. You know, in politics, things can change in a dime. They can change in a week and change. As things, if the elections were held today, yes, he'll most likely wins, especially if the opposition is what it is. But listen, what matters here are democratic norms. Who wins, who doesn't win. No one should have the power to try to criminalize the opposition. Now, they will say that these people did this or they did that. They could have, except it just looks bad, and it looks like we're going in a direction in which the government can come up with a case against anybody who he doesn't like. So it is our job to uphold democratic standards by calling it as we see it and not taking sides, because the process itself is far more relevant than the individuals involved, because these individuals are going to change. But you cannot have a situation in which this fighting Russian influence becomes a carte blanche to criminalize any opposition that comes in front of this government.
Yes, exactly. Now, one thing involving that's related is Karapetyan being the head of the electric company, and suddenly the government wants to nationalize it. Now, this is, you know, for those who don't live in Armenia, this is not out of nowhere. Last year, it was a huge deal. We were having blackouts all the time in Yerevan. The electricity grid and infrastructure is way over capacity. Yerevan keeps growing, but our system is very old, though it's going to cost $1 billion or more to actually replace that. So this is not some easy fix. But again, when it comes to convenient timing, I mean, Pashinyan said, I've been working on this for a long time. This is unrelated, but it seemed like the day that Karapetyan made a statement in support of the Catholicos, who Pashinyan is trying to unseat, suddenly he was arrested. So, I mean, what do you make of the nationalizing this whole plan? And I mean, frankly, it is partly owned by a Cyprus holding company, and they say that they will take Armenia to international court, which could be a huge, you know, burden on the government having to pay who knows what. So, I mean, what do you think of what they're doing?
First and foremost, there's two separate issues. The electric company has very specific, real problems and issues. Okay, the one that's never discussed is the fact that the grid is so old that it's actually not designed for where we want to go to, which is towards renewables. Because for renewables, you need a new grid that you can feed electricity from 75 different locations, 75,000 different locations. Traditional grids all over the world are designed to get electricity from 1 or 2 points. So there's actually real issues with this company, a lack of investment in a new grid, blackout issues. So there's a compelling case to reform it, to sell it, to buy it, to nationalize it, and to do it, or have other people run it. However, that has nothing to do with this case, because it is quite obvious that this nationalization at this stage is not happening because of the practical failures of the electrical grid company or the company that owns it. It's happening because of specific political reasons. I highly doubt if Mr. Karapetyan was not involved with this, we'll be dealing with this nationalization. So the problem, at the same time, you know, you need to understand that there are real problems and real changes need to happen. But the timing of this is exceptionally suspicious, that this is entirely political. And what's the danger? The danger is that you do not want to be a country in which economic decisions are based on political considerations. When you talk about investors and half a dozen different things, even outside of investors, you do not make substantial policy that are so critical based on crass political motivations. So that's the problem. It isn't that there's not 1,000 problems. The issue is the timing of it, and the timing of it is not a good sign, given the fact that you're politicizing an economic decision when it should be essentially based on the facts and the economics of it.
I want to pick up a string from something you mentioned in the previous question. about how the West is not going to be bringing democracy or saving Armenia in any way like that. We had just recently a visit from Kaja Kallas, who is the top diplomat of the EU. And the thing is, though, she went to Azerbaijan first. I don't know what the deal was, but usually they will have joint, they go to Yerevan and then to Baku, or to Baku and Yerevan, and they share it just to show this even-handedness. She went to Baku right on April 23rd, which also might have been coincidence, but a lot of Armenians, again, were very upset by the timing of that, and then not going to Yerevan. She said, oh, I'm coming, and it took months. She finally arrived. Now, yesterday at the press conference, Pashinyan was asked about Armenia's EU aspirations, and he said that he's confident that within about 20 years, Armenia will be an EU member. I've also heard from people on the European side, not within Armenia, that the whole Armenian bid is more of just an inconvenience for them, because the thing is they've gotten burned with Georgia and Georgia's aspirations, and they had a visa deal with them, and they don't want to have part two with Armenia, and they don't really want it as a member, I think, overall. But here's this country that's like crying out, basically, or at least making these moves, showing, oh, we want to be a member, and who's the EU to just say, nope, sorry. So what do you think is going on with the EU for the next year or so?
Well, the EU is going to do everything it can to help this government. They will probably sign another enhancement deal, probably a larger aid packet. And most likely, I'm guessing, what they will give to this government to campaign on next year is visa-free travel to Europe. That will be the big give from the EU side. That will be quite popular. Which is, by the way, election interference in a way.
Yeah.
We need to be honest about that. But it's more open than paying bloggers and influencers to say things on your behalf.
And right now, if you talk to local people, they feel like subhuman the way they're treated by the embassies and the attempts to get visas right now. It's just completely unheard of. So there's got to be some degree of liberalization.
That's the most likely give. So there'll be an enhancement on EU relationships and deepening of the integration into the EU. Now, for the first time ever, yesterday he said, well, we're interested in joining the EU publicly, which he's never done before. He's always been coy about it. The reality is the EU is in no mood to expand anything anywhere, okay? They have too many internal problems, and until those internal problems and contradictions are dealt with, there's no one joining anytime soon. So this is a somewhat theoretical issue. I would be highly surprised if any of this moves forward beyond the realm of rhetoric, except if the Russians really start putting more economic pressure on Armenia, that's when we exit the EU and you just go apply to them, even if it's a long line. Everything EU related is not about joining the EU. That's not realistic in the short run, or possibly even the middle run. What's realistic is the direction of the country, and the direction that you're going towards, and where you're integrating your economy towards, where you're integrating military intelligence and politically, which is not the same thing as joining the EU, but it's you're putting yourself in that direction. Now, the way these things work is politics changes, There could be like no chance of joining for 15 or 20 years, and then if the moment comes, when the moment is perfect, the door opens and you can go in. Nobody knows that. The whole idea is to go in that direction. So you have all the benefits of being an EU member or a near EU member that you can use it to develop your country, and you develop your politics, your democracy, your defense, and half a dozen different things. So membership it's not realistic under any circumstances, and frankly, it has little to do with Armenia. It has to do with the internal crises of the EU. The EU is in no position to expand at this point, even if it wanted to. And I don't think there'll even be the votes for it. So this is about playing the long game, but most critically is about which direction you're going to. It's about the directional politics rather than the practicalities of becoming an EU member in a few years, which is not going to happen.
Are there substantial movements, with the military or other type things, that is what we're seeing, that is happening? They are moving towards.
I mean, in almost every way. Armenia is, when it comes to politically, militarily, intelligence-wise, and to a certain extent, the modern part of the Armenian economy, which is banking, IT, it's entirely integrated towards the West, and that's what it works towards. It's the old Armenian economy that's dependent on Russia, agricultural export and other things, cognac, alcohol exports, things like that. The leading edge of the Armenian economy is actually Western-oriented and becoming more so.
All right, so there's one more thing that I'll wrap up with at the press conference. Pashinyan made a statement, perhaps referring to his recent trip to Turkey. He said, "I went to Turkey not with the Armenian-Turkish agenda, but with the agenda of Republic of Armenia, Republic of Turkey relations. This is an important nuance." So what is that referring to?
Well, this goes back to his nation, the real Armenia stuff that he likes to talk about. From a practical point of view, he's actually correct. There's a distinction between the Armenian nation and the Armenian state. So yes, he's the representative of the Armenian state, and he went there under those guys. And frankly, to the extent that he says these things about the importance of state building in Armenia and the real Armenia, or whatever he calls it, he's actually entirely correct. But he's also missing the boat entirely. You have the Armenian nation, which is the Armenians of the world and Armenians here. And then you have the Armenian state, which is a very specific thing. Now, there's always going to be contradictions between the two. But those contradictions, for the most part, if you're skillful enough, can be managed. And then sometimes they're actually helpful, because the nation can actually push for something that the state can't. And the state can push for things that the nation can't. And if you look around the world, all of these states are actually trying to create nations. You look at the way the Indians use their diaspora. Some of the biggest IT people running IT companies in the West are Indians. So you have every nation in the world, whether it's Israel, whether it's China, whether it's India, where they try to use by creating a country that is beyond their borders. Okay? So here, this is a man who has all of these capacities, which is trying to do the exact opposite. At a time when you're actually interested in, if your mandate is state building, which I believe that is his mandate. He wants to state build. The fastest way to state build is actually to engage the Armenian nation. There's like 300 Armenians that work at Google. If you think that there were 300 Azeris or Turks working at Google, do you think those two states would not have weaponized those people? So what this contradiction comes from is, frankly, his lack of understanding of the world, and his inability to work out these contradictions between these two in a favorable way that helps him and helps build the nation state, build the state infrastructure that you want in Armenia. The funny part of all this is that many of his ministers actually do use the Armenian nation to help the Armenian state. You see it in Starlink. How do you think that happened? Via diasporans. Look at the data center.
The Firebird.
What is that? All of this is engaging that. Defense sector, the same thing. So the Armenian nation is already involved in state building, except due to his lack of political imagination, he can't work out the contradiction in these two. So he's actually disabling his own ability to build a state that he actually wants.
Well, I also feel like he has the wrong idea about the diaspora. He associates the diaspora with the people that yell at him when he goes on foreign trips. And there is certainly a large amount of people in the diaspora, or at least a vocal. Whether they're large or just vocal, that's a different story. But he seems to just want to cut them out completely, which is not for the betterment of either of our groups, diaspora or Armenia.
No, it is, because his vision and understanding of things is frankly rather limited. So he sees a few random few people or bloggers or things that many of them with specific political parties that are constantly attacking him for their own reasons. But then again, if you're a sophisticated political figure, you need to understand the distinction. And if he doesn't understand the distinction, then it's his problem. Again, going back to his initial statement, it's actually very telling. It tells you that he's actually telling the truth, but what the truth that he's telling is entirely lost in a much bigger truth that would be much more helpful to him and to the country.
Well, hopefully they'll have a clearer view of the diaspora going forward, because there is a lot that we can do together. And a lot of them are watching right now. They really appreciate you being here, Eric. So thank you for stopping by.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for watching the CivilNet podcast.